Hello there. It's getting quite late again. By way of an addendum to the last video I did, and then the video before that regarding David Davis's speech, well, particularly that actually, the penultimate video I've done, the one before one before last, focusing on the disparity between what David Davis said in his speech that not by a long way was Lucy Letby present at all the deaths across that period. Not by a long way. And he says more about that later, and then that later doesn't come within that speech. Maybe he means later down the road. I've just received an email from the very kind correspondent who sent me that, the complaint he'd made to the BBC Panorama programme. And in the email I've just received from the correspondent, he actually makes the point that, and it's something that I must have overheard it because it is really important, that David Davis mentions the figure 17 in a 13-month period, 17 deaths in a 13-month period. So David Davis in that speech is using the same figure as given in the 2018 FOI. Is he doing that because he's not aware that these figures were updated or allegedly updated or finessed or, made to fit? There's so much, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to grasp what's happening here. But he is saying, but thank you very much to the correspondent with regard to that. The correspondent also states that that there was a revision from the BBC in that they now state the revised figure is that Lucy Letby was on duty, happened to be on duty somewhere, not necessarily in the room or whatever, but just happening to be on duty for 12 out of the 13 deaths. Now 13 is the figure of the revised FOI figures, which apparently were done in 2023. So they've gone down from 17 to 13. And I always had the problem, personally, with the 2018 figures where there were 2 deaths missed out there, obviously missed out because they're happening in months. They happen in months, which end up needing to have a death in each month there because they become murder charges, namely August and October 2015. And there was nothing in the columns, nothing at all. So there was all the issue about were they being miscoded? Were they being miscoded as stillbirths? But thanks so much to this correspondent who makes the point that now is David Davis using the 2018 FOI that the NHS has told the BBC in the interim that is all incorrect? So we don't really know that. Or is he using other information, as the correspondent says to me in the email I've just received? Is he getting information from elsewhere? Is the revised NHS information incorrect? I suspect it well could be. It just seems to, it all begins to neatly fit in terms of it begins to elide itself, to attach itself to the story of the prosecution. In other words, the things that were missing before to individual deaths that end up as murder charges suddenly reappear. And as I said before, when I was looking into that and trying to do a bit of a deep dive on the stats, including the information that the gentleman had sent me about the BBC complaint and the responses from the BBC. So now we have the BBC stating the latest information is that they say they were told that it must be from the NHS, or could it be, as I think Tasha said, yes, it was Tasha who said in one of the of Tea Break with Tasha, please sign up to her channel if you would. Subscribe, I think the word, isn't it? Subscribe. Excellent channel. And She said, or could they have got that from the police or from Evans? Well, yes, that's true. We don't know the source because the BBC weren't that explicit in it, but I've assumed it was the NHS told them that. I think they put it in. I'd have to look at the old email now. I think it's in sort of terms like, well, we understand or we learn or something like that. In other words, that eventually that they're saying that the final numbers from the BBC back to the person who I've been corresponding with, who made the complaint, is Lucy Letby was present for 12 of 13, 13 being the revised figure of deaths across this 13-month period. I was getting complicated now with 13. I'd rather put it in terms of a full 2-year period. Why would you not? Why would you not? Because it's an artificial swatch of time otherwise that then becomes something they just grab onto. It's a full 2-year period. They're now saying it's 13 deaths in the new FOIs that you can get, and which I have got and asked for, and which were confirmed by this BBC response that were 13 deaths. But whether that's true or not, that's the important thing. Is that true? Can you trust the NHS? Can you trust the BBC? Why is David Davis saying there were 17 deaths across this 13-month period? So he's talking about, I'm presuming, June 2015 to July 2016. That's the 13 months he's talking about. And he's using the same figure. He's using it's even more interesting because he's using the same figure there as the 2018 FOI shows. But here's another element. That 2018 FOI is 17 deaths, not for just a 13-month period, but beyond the 13-month period. In other words, there's a death before June 2015, earlier in 2015, and there's a death after July 2016 on that FOI in 2018. I hope this makes sense. What it boils down to is that I don't know where David Davis has got that figure from. Is it that he's just not been made aware of the revised figures? And are those revised figures accurate? The NHS say that, well, the NHS via the BBC say that those figures were inaccurate. And the NHS say via the facts of new FOIs that you can request, and I have requested, essentially show different figures. So they've revised them. The idea is they've revised them in 2023, So they've done that during the trial, essentially, The trial has already started and they've done it in 2023. I don't know the month they did it. And thank you to, I nearly said the name then, thank you to the correspondent. David Davis is speaking as though he's still using the 2018 FOI. Or is he? Or has he got that 17 figure from somewhere else? It's important. These things are important because, well, obviously it's important. I mean, it's obviously important, integrally important in terms of what deaths happened and when, to the individual families. Obviously, it's of supreme importance, but it's important in trying to assess the reliability of the information from the NHS, and then the information being promulgated allegedly from the NHS or possibly from them via the BBC, via a programme like Panorama. So there's a disjunction here. And it's kind of live now, in the sense that it's formed part of, will somebody contact David Davis and say, you said in Parliament there were 17 deaths. Actually, there's been revised FOIs now, and it was 13. So because we didn't get to the point where David Davis says more about that later, it would necessarily be in the substance of that. Had he spoken about that, I would hope that you'd find out whether he had some solid basis for still saying there were 17 deaths. You can see where we are, can't you? It's up in the air. It's up in the air because of lack of reliability of the NHS primarily here. Because they gave out nearer to the time it happened in 2018, way nearer to the time it happened. They told somebody who asked, I think it was I think the name was Walid Aslam, Aslam, I think. Aslan or Aslam, Walid Aslam. Stuart Gillam does a really fantastic video when he talks about that FOI application. When Stuart Gillam's also talking about the Embrace data, which I also looked at in previous videos. Walid Aslam, I think, 2018 FOI. A lot of that information suddenly is deemed wrong by the NHS 5 years later, and wrong in different directions, as I've said in previous videos. Wrong in different directions, i.e. deaths appear in places where they were not in 2018, in the 2023 revised figures, and a lot of other deaths disappear. And that's meant to be explained. According to the BBC now, so it's kind of at one remove, it's explained through the answer to the complaint to the BBC. It's explained by the idea that no, is it just by the BBC? I'm having trouble putting this together now. Because it's just a mess. Everything's just tortuous. The idea is, and I think it was related by the BBC to the complainant, to say that the NHS they did a manual assessment across different platforms, some kind of admin jargon like that, and then they found that all that previous information was wrong, and seriously wrong, in different directions, as I went through a minute ago. So Jesus Christ, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's of concern to me because I wouldn't want David Davis or anyone working on this to be blindsided by suddenly somebody popping up and saying, well, hold on, there are only 13 deaths. So we now say, but is that true? Or does he know something else? Does he know something more? I just don't know. And just a slight correction as well from what I said in the penultimate video is that the BBC's final statement about this is that the NHS or whomsoever has told them that Lucy Letby was present for 12 out of the 13 being the revised figure for 2015-2016, as opposed to 17, which was the FOI figure for those 2 full years. And so there's a disjunction with what David Davis is saying there, that he's talking about a 13-month period, i.e. June until and including the full month of July, June 2015 to July 2016, that's 13 months. But if he is relying on 2018 data, FOI data from the NHS, then that's not accurate either, because as I said before, there was a death before, there was a death on that FOI, on the 2018 FOI, a death earlier in the year in 2015, and indeed there was a death later in the year in 2016, namely, and this was always an anomaly until we heard they'd rejigged the data or done it better, or whether we can believe them or not, there's the death in August 2016, i.e. a death of a late neonate baby in August 2016, a month after Lucy Letby has been sent to the admin position, has been taken off duties. And that disappears. That death of a late neonate baby disappears. How do you explain that? How do you explain a system that has it there and then you can just remove it? I mean, I don't know. They're not giving you, the devil's going to be in the detail, and they're not giving us the detail. They're just saying it was wrong. We've done a manual count, and here's the new figures for you. And we're not going to really tell you, we're not going to show you our workings out or why it was so badly wrong back in 2018 when that FOI was applied for by Walid Aslan or Aslan. Okay, I'll leave it there, and thank you again very much to the correspondent regarding that in respect of the BBC complaint, and for spotting that he's saying 17 here rather than 13, and that is a salient point. I missed that. It obviously went past over my head when I listened to it. I was just focusing on the thing about more about that later, and the statement that he says, well, by no means was Lucy Letby there for all of those deaths. And he's saying there's 17 now, which is old figures, quote unquote old figures. Can't rely and trust the NHS or the BBC in this matter. And unfortunately, my personal belief is in with regard to a lot of other things as well. Thank you and good night and God bless.